Hello and welcome to Prompting for Value from Copilot for Microsoft 365. I'm Dan Colby, the Director of Client Technology Value here at Advania UK. There's my LinkedIn profile if you wish to link in with me. I often post about Copilot and AI, etc. And I'm joined today by my colleague Ross.
Hi, I'm Ross. I'm part of the business change and adoption team here at Advania, and I've been involved in a lot of Copilot and even going far back enough to be one of the testers for OpenAI a while ago. So I've been doing prompting for a long time.
Thanks, Ross. For those of you that don't know us as Advania, I'll spend a few seconds talking about us as a company. So we were previously known as Content and Cloud, but acquired by Advania 2.5 years ago and rebranded more recently. As Advania as a group, we're about 6,000 people. The numbers on the slide are slightly out of date. We are based in the UK and then across the Nordics. And certainly in the UK, we are very focused on Microsoft technology. We're a leading Microsoft partner in the UK, and we're a leading partner around Copilot. We've recently invested in Copilot for our entire company, licensing 1,200 users for Copilot. And we're using Copilot alongside other Microsoft AI technologies, such as the private ChatGPT solution that we've built within Azure. We find sometimes it's worth using different tools for different modes of work, but Copilot for Microsoft 365 certainly is the go-to place for anything to do with personal productivity or work within the Microsoft 365 environment. So do you want to tell us a bit about Copilot, Ross?
Yeah. So Copilot is Microsoft's main AI tool. They in fact have several different Copilots, but the main one is Microsoft 365 Copilot. This is a Copilot that embeds itself directly in the tools that most people are used to using when they use Microsoft. It goes in and embeds itself in Word, in PowerPoint, Excel, but it's based off of a large language model. And this means we can interact with it very differently to how we interact with the rest of technology. Meaning that when it comes to creating things, summarizing, pulling information together and searching, it opens up an entirely new avenue. Whereas before you might have to be really specific with AI, this invention of a large language model has really changed the face of how we can interact with technology. And Microsoft have pushed into this by use of Copilot, and especially Copilot for Microsoft 365 brings this into everyday tasks with work. Alongside that is it's a fantastic tool when it comes to being creative. A lot of the time we could be held back by there being a blank page in front of us or not quite knowing where to start. And Copilot allows us to do that first element, not taking everything away from you. The name is in the product, it's your Copilot, it's your assistant that's next to you. But it means that you can be more creative because you have Copilot there as a tool to start with. It also allows you to be more productive. As your Copilot, as your digital assistant, it means that you're not bogged down with tasks that mean you're not doing what you actually want to. You're bogged down with unnecessary admin, with finding things, with trying to organize information. It allows you to be more productive because it streamlines a lot of those processes. And as well, on top of that, it allows you to go in and learn things quicker. And being able to use Copilot is a huge upskilling when it comes to technology in general.
And when we think about how we might leverage those capabilities, it's important, I think, to think, how does Copilot deliver a return on investment to the businesses and organizations that purchase the licenses? And when we think about the business case, traditionally we'd think of a technology that we know in another business, and we can apply and extend the value we see there to your organization, or you think about a similar technology in your organization and extrapolate the value from that. But with generative AI, it's generally different because as a community of IT professionals, we don't fully know what it's capable of, and we don't know all of the business applications that it could be used for. We're learning, we're getting lots more information, and we obviously share those with all of our customers. But it's still important to give the tool to the user, to let them be inspired by the technology, by what it's capable of doing, and to experiment with it. And I think the way to really measure the way that Copilot can work for the individuals in your organization and then collectively for your whole company is to give it to the users, stay very close to them, make sure that they're understanding how to use it properly, make sure that they're focused on leveraging Copilot in the best way possible to drive value for them and for the organization, but let them do some value experimentation and figure out what to do. So very much the starting point for getting going with Copilot is to have a small testing group of users to help them use Copilot, to measure the value that they're getting from it, and then to work out how to extend the usage of Copilot more broadly across your organization. And what we've found in the customers we've been working with and also in our own usage is that the absolute key component to delivering value and getting success with Copilot is user change and adoption. Because when you think about it, you give somebody a Copilot license, you're fundamentally asking them to change the way they work and to overturn years, maybe decades of muscle memory of how they do their everyday tasks to achieve their job. And it's also important to give people help when they start using Copilot, because there's a strong opportunity for disillusionment with Copilot. This is the Gartner hype cycle for generative AI, and they place the generative AI virtual assistants, of which Copilot is one, at the precipice there of the trough of disillusionment. Because there's been a lot of hype around Gen AI, there's been a lot of marketing from Microsoft around Copilot. And when you first give Copilot to a user, if they start working with one of the elements of it that's perhaps not as mature as the rest of the technology, or they start using it in the wrong way, or the way that they prompt isn't mature enough, then they could be disillusioned quite quickly. But we know that there's huge value to be gained from leveraging Copilot, and so helping users to manage their expectations of what they can do with the tool, and also managing the potential disillusionment is the place to start.
And never the pit of disillusionment so obvious. Besides when it comes to using Copilot and generative AI, especially because a lot of the time people have an idea that AI is going to be this thing that goes and does things for you, and it's trying to step away from what people think it does and learn actually where it fits in. And it's a huge change as well for people's working habits, whereas they would have been taking notes on a piece of paper, or even if it's they're using OneNote, there is still a huge step between doing what they're used to and moving into this view of, wait, can Gen AI do this first? And making it that first step is a lot of thought process. And unfortunately, what tends to happen if you leave people with the tool and don't guide them in a way where actually this is where it fits into your work, this is where you put it in, this is where you should start, people tend to go, well, they just go straight back into their habit. They get a bit disillusioned with the tool. It's not for me. It doesn't match what I'm trying to do. And therefore, they don't see where it fits into their work habits. So it's really important to address that really early on.
It's also important, I think, to address people's concerns. Excuse me. Definitely what we saw 12 to 18 months ago when Gen AI tools came to market, first of all, was that people were worried that their jobs might not be secure, that AI might come and replace them. I think if you're a factory worker, then being replaced by a robot and some automation is a fear that you would have had to conquer years ago. But if you're a marketing professional writing content and creating content for publishing, you probably wouldn't have thought that AI would be potentially replacing you anytime soon. But that was definitely a concern of people a while ago. But as we've worked with customers, especially with Copilot from Microsoft 365, they very quickly learn that it's not there to replace them. It's there to be their own personal assistant. It's there to be their own Copilot. And they can harness that capability and they can really drive value for themselves using the technology. And they certainly need to change the way they're working, as you said, Ross. And they also need to change perhaps the things they focus on. But Copilot gives the human time to focus on the things that are uniquely human and value added to the situation, rather than spending time doing things that are perhaps a bit more mundane or time wasting potentially.
Definitely. And the next sort of element within this as well is trying to get people to find where those valuable use cases are. As we'll speak about as we go through the presentation, we'll talk about some easy sort of things to pick up straight away, but it's getting those valuable use cases and really expanding on them and giving them to users, not just letting them find them themselves, but once they've found somewhere, really digging deep into, fantastic, how now do we turn this process into something that leverages the full capabilities of something like Copilot? And not just once, but throughout an entire process. and being able to go in and find those valuable use cases has been something really interesting that we've done with our clients, but also something that continues to be a challenge, trying to help people understand where they can turn what is a standard sort of daily activity, weekly activity, monthly activity into something where Gen AI fits in all of their different steps, and then being able to utilize Copilot within there.
And the other thing that we've found really important in this is once we've got those use cases and people are deriving value from Copilot, that we measure it quite carefully and we understand precisely what that value is and what of that value is tangible to the organization and what's intangible or less tangible, because that's what lets you build a business case. That's what lets you extrapolate the value those individuals are having to the broader organization or to broader teams across the organization. And so, very much that helping the user on the journey, helping them develop valuable use cases, and then measuring those to build a business case is all very part and parcel of the same activity, all centered around that user change and adoption. And then the final thing, obviously, from that user change piece is that we actually deliver training. And you might think that Copilot is an intuitive AI tool, but the single thing that we've found that is the difference between getting value from Copilot and not getting value from Copilot is how the users prompt it, how they engage with the tool, how they instruct it as to what to do, and how they interpret the way that it gives that information back. And you've found, Ross, certainly, haven't you, that delivering that training is a very, very important part of getting success for clients with Copilot.
It definitely is a game changer when we're going from an untrained user to one who's trained in how to prompt and where to find those pieces. And one of the first things we like to train people on are the core capabilities when it comes to Copilot. The first one being is that in Teams meetings. And I'm sure everyone who listens to this agree, every customer we've been to, Teams meetings is something which is absolutely a fantastic tool to have. But if you have too much Teams meetings, it becomes a bit of a burden. And the Copilot ability within Teams meetings to be able to summarize, catch up, capture actions, and do all of those sort of added features in Teams is a huge game changer. Taking Teams meetings from something that can be a bit of a burden to actually something that can be shorter, that can mean you can engage with people. You're not sitting there on a notepad. And it is a huge change, but it's one of those core aspects which every person we've shown this to, spoken about, they've gone, wow, that's pretty cool. And it's the first thing people sort of grab hold of as their main use. The next one along there then is researching. Probably my favorite thing about Copilot is that it brings everything together into one place. If you think you've got Teams chats, you've got channels, you've got then Teams, you've got things coming through in Outlook, you've got information coming in from Viva Engage, you've got all these different places where information is coming from, but Copilot can bring it all together, which means when you're researching, when you're drafting, when you're trying to pull information from multiple places, including the web, before this would have been a really manual task, finding all those bits and pieces, copying it in, having a million tabs open, trying to find bits of information. But rather Copilot, because of its way it can access lots of different sources, both within your organization and from outside the organization, means that it suddenly becomes a really streamlined task. Simply asking it, hey, where's this, where's that, or asking it to do something and giving it the context, meaning it can pull information from a whole variety of sources. Then the last thing which it's fantastic at then is summarization, especially if you deal with lots of documents or long email threads that you're suddenly added to. That can become a huge burden. Or often it's the case that you just don't go and read it. If you're given constant documents, PDFs, Word documents, are you really reading or are you skimming, in which case you might miss crucial bits? Whereas using Copilot to summarize means that it's picking up those crucial bits for you. And it works brilliantly in Outlook as well with email threads, where there's lots of threads of information, suddenly you're added to it, or you're trying to keep track of what's going on. It's very good at finding out actually what's happening. It takes out the formalities, it takes out the waffle, and it even takes out the sometimes passive aggressiveness people can find in emails, and it tones it right down to what's important. So when it comes to your meetings, finding and researching and consuming content, these are the core capabilities of Copilot, which people can find value from relatively quickly and tend to pick up and grasp. And it tends to be the first thing that we train people on.
And what we've also seen is that sort of journey that Ross just took you through there translates into the business value that you get from Copilot. Now, Copilot obviously does certain things out of the box, and a meeting recap is a really good example of that. You don't need to do anything as a user other than record the meeting or at least transcribe the meeting. And as soon as you've finished, you get minutes from the meeting and you get actions from the meeting. And that's pretty useful. You don't have to take notes throughout the meeting so you can focus more. You don't have to spend time afterwards consolidating or writing up those notes. And it saves people time and people really love it. And I think it's easy to get enough value from those core capabilities of Copilot in order to justify the license fee. But that's not really where the full value comes from with Copilot. In order to get better value, what you need to do is really do work with Copilot. And an example of that, looking at my own work that I do, is perhaps something like if I want to make a proposal to a customer based on the conversation we've had about their requirements. Now, that conversation could have been a week or two ago. I've probably forgotten some of the detail that we discussed. And what I could do is go to Copilot and look at the meeting recap, see the summarized minutes of the meeting, see some of the actions that were agreed, and that would jog my memory about the meeting, probably sufficiently to be able to then go and formulate and write a proposal. However, I can go a step further than that. Instead of looking at the meeting recap that's auto-generated, I can download the transcript from the meeting into a Word document. I can then use Copilot in Word to reference that transcript and get it to really flesh out for me what was discussed in the meeting. I can, not just recall verbatim for me what was discussed, but I can say, summarize the requirements that this customer had. Was there anything that was particular to this stakeholder? What sort of effort might be required to deliver that, etc. And I can ask Copilot all of these kind of questions. I can get it perhaps to formulate the output as a table, so that I can then take that table and drop it straight into a proposal document or proposal PowerPoint that either I create myself or perhaps I can even create that with Copilot. So what I'm crucially doing there is I'm not just using Copilot as an aide-memoire from the meeting. I'm using it to really create work, to do work, to create the output for me and massively accelerate the time it takes me to create that proposal for the customer. And what I'm probably also doing is increasing the quality of the proposal that I'm creating, because it's picking up on things that were discussed that perhaps I've forgotten, or maybe I didn't think about too much in the meeting at the time. To take it one step further, what I can do is continue to do work with Copilot, but do so in a way that helps me orchestrate the business process. If you think about what I was saying earlier about making benefits tangible, doing work with Copilot, that might save me an hour in the case of that proposal generation. But what do I use that hour for? So what? I've saved an hour. If I go and use that hour to take a walk in the park, maybe I'm happier as an employee, and that'll definitely have a benefit for my employer. But is it driving more revenue? If I use the hour to make another sale to a customer, that's definitely making a difference to the business metrics of my employer. But if I'm using Copilot to help me run a business process and orchestrate something that is now done quicker, more efficiently, more effectively, perhaps I'm now handing off to a colleague or a third party more quickly, then that's much more likely to be driving tangible business value to the organization. And then this is slightly in the future, but only just slightly in the future. What we'll be able to do soon with Copilot through Copilot Studio is to automate processes and take the capabilities of Copilot and build them into automatic workflows, so that I often talk about Copilot as being a dog with a stick. It's good at the moment at retrieving sticks very efficiently, very effectively, and then it brings the stick back to me and patiently sits at my feet waiting for me to throw the stick again. If I can automate that process, then it can be more autonomous. It can go off and collect sticks itself, maybe build me a bonfire. Bit of an abstract idea, but the concept of that increased levels of value you get from Copilot coming from the core capabilities to doing work, to orchestrating process, then becomes even more valuable if that process orchestration is completely automatic and delivered by Copilot.
And to start it all off, though, it's best to have some of those fundamentals down. And I would say this is a nice example of what those fundamentals are. These are simple prompts that can get you going with Copilot. And essentially these 10 prompts, they're not too complicated. They're very straightforward. You could quite literally copy and paste some of these and put them directly into your Copilot, and you'd get something out of it that could be useful. However, what it doesn't do is it sometimes doesn't give you exactly what you're looking for. So although these do have some value to you, the best value we can gain out of Copilot is when we follow the anatomy of a good prompt. This is actually a structure that was put together in both conjunction of Microsoft on OpenAI, of how to actually put together a prompt in a way that gets you a response that is useful. And this is the GCSE approach of goal, context, source, and expectation. To begin with, every single prompt you do needs to have a clear and concise goal. What do you want from it? You can have multiple goals in there, but as long as they're clear goals, Copilot knows what it's wanting to do. The next one is probably the most difficult one sometimes to get our heads around, and that is context. Why do we need this? What world does this prompt exist within? Often when we think of context, this could lean into what it is. So I could be asking it, well, I need a summary. But the context of that summary is I'm actually going to send it in an email to reply to a meeting or reply to a meeting I've had. So the context is really important. Context defines how that prompt is written. This can sometimes be the words it uses, the structure it has. So if the context is that this is going to a group of very technical people, it could keep that language very technical. If it's going to a wide range of audiences and you say that in the context, it will change the language accordingly. So we have to make sure that our context is clear so that it can word the prompt in a way that's useful for us. Then we've got our source. As we've said before, Copilot has a huge source of information. It is taking absolutely everything that's sitting in your OneDrive, that could be in SharePoint. It's taking information from the web, from your Teams, from your Outlook. And I'm sure you're thinking, well, not all of that's good information. And that's why defining a source is a key component when it comes to Copilot. Otherwise, it's going to pull it from everywhere, or it's going to pull it where it thinks is best. And sometimes that information is not accurate. It might be out of date. It might be a draft document it's pulling it from that you never actually finished, meaning the information is not very useful. But if we're clear and defined with our source, perhaps even referencing exact documents, meetings, websites, it means that that source is reliable, so the output that comes out of it will also be reliable. The last aspect of this is expectation. Expectation wraps all of these elements together, ultimately going, well, what do you want this to be? So do we want this to be a series of bullet points? Do we want it to be 2,000 words long? What is our expectation going to be? When we have all of these elements in combination together, ultimately it gives us a prompt that will give us value. Sometimes you'll find that you'll give it all of these different bits, but sometimes you'll give it a bit more source, or you'll give it several goals, a few different bits of context. You don't necessarily have to do it in this exact way. But when you're creating a prompt, make sure to include at least one of these key elements to it. But Dan's now going to take you through a bit of a practical way of putting this in your head.
So yeah, I think it helps to be a bit more abstract and think about a scenario that Copilot can't do. So Copilot cannot make a cup of tea, or at least not at the moment. But think about this in terms of the specificity that I get by giving it these extra components. If I say, make me a cup of tea, then it will make me a cup of tea. But there are lots of different variables that could exist in that cup of tea. Now, from its training, Copilot knows that a cup of tea requires water and it requires tea bags. But it could make me green tea, it could make me black tea, it could make me really milky tea, it could make me cold tea, it could make me lemon tea, potentially. All of those are perfectly viable interpretations of make me a cup of tea. But most of them are not going to meet the expectations that I've got from what I wanted from Copilot. Hence, I could be easily disillusioned thinking Copilot's rubbish at making tea because it's maybe a cold cup of really milky green tea. Very odd combination, but might have done that. So if I think about it, let's think about really how these different components of additional information help it. Let's start with the how at the bottom. So if I say, make sure that has a splash of milk and it's piping hot, that means that it will definitely make me hot tea with a little bit of milk. So definitely not black tea, not overly milky tea, not cold tea. Immediately, it's meeting my expectations far better than just the pure goal of make me a cup of tea. Now I'm asking it telling it where to get the information from. Now it knows that tea needs water and tea bags, but the first piece of water it might come across is the toilet. And it might scoop water out of the toilet to make a cup of tea. Not particularly appetizing, probably not very healthy either. I don't want that. I want nice fresh water from the tap. So I say, get water from the tap. Similarly with the tea bags. The first tea bag it comes across, the one that's most efficient for it to get hold of, could be in the bin. It might be a used tea bag, and it thinks it's also being environmentally friendly by recycling the tea bag. But that won't give me the strength of tea or the flavour of tea that I want, and it might also be unhealthy. So I say, I want the tea bags from the cupboard. And then come on to the expectation, to the context, and why I need it. There could be lots of reasons why I want a cup of tea. I might have had water all day and I'm perfectly hydrated, but I fancy the taste of a cup of tea, in which case a nice, small, very flavoursome cup of tea is what I'd be wanting. But in this case, I'm saying I've not had a drink all day. I'm thirsty. So as you can see in the AI-generated image, it responds by creating a large cup of tea that can help hydrate me and quench that thirst. So therefore, for what was a very ambiguous statement of make me a cup of tea, I've now got a very specific statement with a very specific outcome, and I'm much more likely to get what I want from Copilot, get it quickly, get it first time of asking, and therefore be much more satisfied and get more value from using Copilot in this situation.
So taking it now from the abstract of a cup of tea and putting it back into a more business-oriented prompt, we've got a nice example here that shows each of those different 4 aspects. So we've got our clear and concise goal, generate 3 to 5 bullet points. It's been really specific there. It's told it exactly what it wants. Then the context. And I always like the context of this example because it goes in and says, well, it's not just about that specific client, but it says the context is about that specific client, a specific element of their project as well. So it's saying about phase 3. Then it goes into the source. Remember, the source is everything. So here we see it says focus on email, focus on Teams chats, but it's been specific again, and it's saying since June. So there it's put all the source that it can possibly gain into actually something probably relatively quite small. Lastly, we've got our expectation there. And the expectation of this one is to use simple language so they can get up to speed quickly. The goal of this prompt is to put all of these elements together, but what you'll get out the back of it, because of that expectation, we know will be easy to understand so that they can look at it, read it, quickly grasp it, and probably move on. So this is an example of a GCSE prompt put in order and separated out. We're now going to show you some of these prompts, the differences between perhaps a prompt that doesn't use GCSE and a prompt that does, in a few different ways and applications.
And I think just before I jump into those examples, one thing to note about Copilot, if you haven't really used it before, is that it exhibits, it surfaces in the different applications in Microsoft 365. So it surfaces in Outlook, in Teams, in Excel, Word, PowerPoint, Whiteboard, Loop components, lots of different elements of Microsoft 365. But it behaves differently in each of those applications. And the reason it behaves differently is because the applications themselves apply context. The applications themselves apply source. So a Teams meeting, for example, the source is the transcript. The context is that you're having a meeting. That's pre-baked into the application. And I've got an example here for PowerPoint where it's the source in this case is actually its own training or the internet. But there's some pre-baked prompts here where you can say, create me a presentation or create a presentation from this file, again, giving it a specific source. If I want, I can speak to Copilot instead of writing. Or it's got here, I'm just showing you right now, is some pre-written prompts that I could perhaps learn from or get inspired from. And then there's a much greater library of prompts here that Microsoft are providing, so I can get some help and inspiration. What I'm going to do first is say, create a presentation about Copilot for Microsoft 365. Simple prompt, put into the chat on the side here, and away it goes, creating me that presentation. And it's done an okay job. It's probably not what I would create. It's probably not the most thorough presentation, but I've got 13 slides there, nicely laid out, some good information, accompanied by some engaging images. So again, creating that's all part of the context of PowerPoint. It knows that I need a presentation. It understands that a presentation should have some text and some video and a flow to the conversation. So just by saying, create me a presentation about Copilot for Microsoft 365, if I'd done that in Copilot Chat or in Word, it might have described it, but it wouldn't have created all of this. So a lot of that content and source comes because I'm in this particular application. I'm just going to show you an example in Word now of the difference between a simple prompt and a GCSE prompt. So within Word, I've got that Copilot Chat on the right-hand side I could use, or I've got this mode here where I'm generating content. And I said, write me a blog about Microsoft 365. It does an okay job. It creates a reasonable amount of content. It's created something which looks pretty accurate, but it's a blog. I want to produce something which is going to advertise us as a business, as Advania, or I want to do something which is perhaps longer for people to read. So now I'm going to revise this prompt and say, create me a blog of 20,000 words about Copilot for Microsoft 365 and how Advania can help customers implement it and get value for it. And if you saw there, I've linked specifically to a presentation I just gave about that and the recording, the transcript of me giving that presentation. So I'm giving it a huge amount of specific source of data there about what our offerings are as Advania, maybe more detail about the product, and giving it a lot more information to go on, as well as context. I want this blog to talk about our offerings as Advania. I'm setting expectation. I want it to be 20,000 words long, and I want it to really show the customer what we can do for them, etc. And so you see the output there is quite different. It's much longer, it's much more detailed, it's much more specific about our usage of Copilot and how we deliver that to the customer. And all that's because I've just changed the GC and SE components of the way I've written that prompt. And obviously the prompt's more verbose as a result.
Now, Teams work slightly differently. Because Teams has a predefined aspects of that GCSE, as Dan said, it means that when we are prompting within it, we can do it slightly differently. In the example of the video, the prompt that was put in there was relatively small, simply asking for a summarization of the meeting. The source of a Teams meeting Copilot is always the transcript of that meeting. It can't see, it can't hear the meeting, so it bases it just off that transcript. It also cannot source information from anywhere outside of that transcript. So when you're prompting in Teams, you don't have to say using the transcript or in this meeting because it already knows. It does also put a bit of a limitation on there, however, whereas it won't go outside of that meeting to find information. It also controls the GCSE slightly on the expectation side of things and the context. The context is always what's being spoken about in the meeting, and the expectation is to keep it brief. This Copilot is expecting you to be reading this while you're in the meeting. So no matter what you do, it keeps it short and sweet, meaning you can pick it up and carry on your meeting. This is a fantastic Copilot for going in and getting recaps, summarizations, filling you on questions you could perhaps ask or what perhaps is going on in that meeting. However, it's key to keep in mind that how we prompt this one does differ from the ones that Dan just showed, because you can be slightly more simple with what you ask it to do because of those limitations. If you want something more out of a meeting and to get a bit more value from it, a really good way you can get this is by then taking that transcription that comes as a Word document and taking it a step further. This is an example now of working with Copilot through several steps. Here, I've got a prompt that matches our GCSE structure, and I'm actually putting two different sources in. I'm putting a transcription from a meeting, so going in, having the meeting, recording it, and taking the transcription, and then I'm having a secondary source of a template. From that, I'm creating a sales proposal from a client call. It goes and it generates all of this different content. Then, perhaps I don't want to send the client a Word document, I want to send them a PowerPoint. But I want to make sure that that PowerPoint is branded. So I start in a branded deck. Once you start in a branded deck, it knows to follow that branding on because it uses it as a source automatically. You can then add in the Word document that you might have just created. Using those two things in combination, it can then present a slide deck for you. Then you might think, well, I need to send this to the client, so I need a summary of this document to include in that email to send out. Here we could use something like 365 Chat to create that. Then again, referencing specifically that document to create it. Sometimes we might find our outputs aren't quite what we want. Here, the output was a bit too big. So we've asked it then to be more concise, probably about the right size to include in an email. But before I send that email out, I want to check that actually what I've created is good. So in Teams, just in a standard Teams chat, I've typed in a very quick message. I'm being very quick with my typing, perhaps making a few mistakes, but that's not an issue because the Copilot within a Teams chat, can fix your message, make it slightly more formal, and allow you to send it out, fixing any mistakes. Now it's finally time to actually send this off to the client. We use another Copilot, the one to draft emails in Outlook. This one's quite interesting because instead of going in and putting in a prompt where you add in what you'd like the expectation to be, the expectation is defined by some sliders on the left-hand side, meaning you can choose the length of the email, how formal or casual you would like it to be. Once it's created that email, you can either prompt it more or decide to keep it. This has just been an example of taking Copilot through several different steps. So when we're thinking about it, we don't want to think about it in isolation. These Copilots are designed to work together. It just requires a little bit of process from us to take it from one Copilot to another. Taking perhaps the main thing I've done here is the human input. I had the call with the client. Everything else in between, Copilot's done. So I've still provided my value in my discussion I had with that client. But from that point onwards, from the transcription to the proposal it made, the template it used, the messages I sent out regarding it, and finally sending it off to the client, had Copilot at every stage, getting me just 80% of the way there, 60% of the way there, with then slight alterations. And getting people to step into that mindset of, right, how can I use Copilot in every step of my day-to-day is a really key place of which we can gain value out of it.
I think that's great, Ross. Thank you. Yeah, and not only are you showing they're using Copilot in lots of different modes together, but that's an amazing example of doing work with Copilot. So you're immediately on at least the second, if not perhaps the third rung of that value ladder that I was showing before. So getting this level of maturity of Copilot usage baked into everybody's day-to-day work is a way that you're going to really drive both individual value and organizational value from that investment you've made in Copilot, which is ultimately what we as Advania are here to help our customers with. So if you'd like any help with that, scan this QR code if you have a phone to hand, or click on the link or links that we'll probably send you in some marketing follow-up from this. And we'd be happy to come and talk to you about the possibilities of what you could do with Copilot in your organization, or about how you could best go about starting to get going with it, piloting it with your users and deriving a business case from that for really what it's going to do for your organization. So thank you, Ross. Great to have joined you in this session today. Some really good insights there for all of our customers and prospects who are watching. And see you soon.
Thank you very much. See you soon.